I'll be making some forward-looking statements, so I got to keep compliance and the SEC happy. So here's our disclosure on that. But exhausted from a brilliant trip to Berkeley, San Francisco, and Palo Alto last week. And in the notes, put in what incredible speakers we had in the content. They were simply amazing. The depth of information and the quality was second to none. But while we were there, I found a really interesting contrast between what's happened to the city of San Francisco and the challenges that it's going through, similar to what major cities are around the world. And then right down the road, the amazing innovation that's going on that's so positive about the future, and trying to balance the two off was actually something I spent a bit of the flight home thinking about, of how different things were. And San Francisco has always been my second favorite city in the US behind New York. And when I got back, I was trying to think what I was going to cover. And then I was doing some research, and the New York Fed just came out with a report on economic well-being. And I was really trying to think about what our young people, and I have 4 kids in their 20s, are dealing with versus what we dealt with growing up, and how different the world is today, and this challenges and the pressures are. So I wanted to spend a little time on talking about economic well-being in the contrast of the challenges and the opportunities that are ahead. So the New York Fed does a survey annually where they look at the overall financial well-being, and the survey respondents have been kind of trailing down to a level that we were right after the pandemic lockdowns hit in 2020. So you can see that people are feeling that they're generally okay, but not, and this is, are you doing okay? It's not, are you doing great or anything? So not a particularly good number. When you delve into it, 50% of those earning less than 100,000 are spending everything they make or more. And I think that's really what the strain is that we're seeing in the system. And one of the challenges I think the administration has right now is, while the numbers are really good, they are not getting credit for it. We'll touch more on that a little bit later. If you're a financial well-being for a parent with a kid living with your kids under 18, it's even worse. And you can see here the bottom line here is 64% is the number that are doing at least okay, versus 75 for those without kids living with without kids under 18 living with them. And then they asked, are you doing better or worse than you were a year ago? And this is really interesting in that, excuse me, 31% are saying that they're doing worse than they were 12 months ago, and 20% saying they're doing better. Again, not great if you're an incumbent in an election year, to have that kind of those kind of numbers going against you. And what are the challenges that people are struggling with, and what are their main financial challenges? It's the ones we know. They say it's inflation, but it's really cost of living. It's not the inflation numbers that are going the other way. And it's what it takes to get through to day is really what's weighing on them. That's, 56% of the respondents cited those two areas, with housing coming in at third. So you can see this, we know where the strains are. It's the haves and have-nots that exist out there today. But it's not just the Fed that got it. University of Michigan survey came up with the similar findings, that higher prices are the reasons for worse personal finances. And then it's also poor buying conditions come from the higher interest rates and the tightening of credit conditions. And you can see the difference in the mentions of these issues being a problem skyrocketing from 22 to now in terms of homes, and also a significant move up in cars and other durables. So you can see where the areas of strain are coming from. And then they ask, well, how are you doing versus your local economy versus the national economy? And clearly the top line, you can see the numbers that I showed right at the start, 72% are saying they're doing okay. But when they think about their local economy, 42% say the local economy is doing good or excellent. And on a national level, only 22% are saying that it's doing good or excellent. So kind of a tough spot to be in right now. And I think one of the big issues here is highlighted in a recent Harris poll done for The Guardian in the UK. And it talks about the misperceptions that people have of the economy. And I think this is going to be a pretty significant problem for President Biden, in that 55% believe the economy is shrinking and 56% believe the US is experiencing a recession, yet GDP is running at pretty good levels right now, around 3%. 49% believe that the S&P stock market index is down for the year, even though it was up 24% last year and is up over 10% this year. And 49% of the people surveyed by Harris Group feel that unemployment in the US is at a 50-year high when it's the unemployment rate is under 4% and has been hovering near a 50-year low. So this is one of the problems that the politicians have, and it gets to the emotions around inflation, emotions around finances, and how local it gets for people in terms of how they feel about their elections. And take it a step further, when they talked about their emotions around inflation, the vast majority of respondents think inflation is increasing at a 72% rate, feel that inflation is increasing, when in fact the rate has fallen sharply from 9.1% to between 3 and 4% a year now. So you're seeing these dynamics that are going on where people feel worse than the economy is actually doing. And that's actually one of the big struggles that I think we're dealing with in the world today. Aside from the fact that inequality is real, the haves and have-nots are getting worse. I think that's going to continue to persist. And right now, it's really the low-income people basically spend all they have, as we saw before. They can save very little. The middle income are really where the economy gets driven in a lot of ways. And right now, what we've had is this massive retirement of the baby boomers with their $75 trillion of net worth that are really carrying the day right now and masking the problems that are going on underneath the surface. So for ARS, we see that we're in one of those periods of economic distortions that go on and disruptions that go on. It's better to be away from the pack when you're investing in this period. We think that the three big themes we talk about regularly: cost of living, which you just saw come through in these surveys, the global fragmentation, which is weighing on a lot of the questions that were asked from 10:30 to 11 about the role of China and what's going on there, the Russian war, the war with Ukraine. All these things are creating these massive distortions that are going on. And then you add to it then the reindustrialization of the global system, augmented by generative AI, GLP-1 medicines, and the climate transformation. And you can see why there's so much change and so much that's being thrown at people, why they're kind of out of kilter. We think that Powell has set the bar really high for a rate hike, which means that you do have a bit of a Fed put coming back in, where the market's now coming back to, all right, we're going to have, I think today the number is 37 basis points of cut before year end. So 1.5 rate cuts from the Fed. So 1 to 2 cuts this year. The economy is in the US overall remains strong on an aggregate level. It's just the pockets inside that are creating these big weaknesses. But on a more positive note, you are seeing more positive signs out of Europe and China, where if you get a bottoming there, and you get a bottoming in 50% of the global economy with another 20%, the US doing quite well, you could actually see that things could look pretty strong going into the new year. And then take it a step further, we do have a lot of concerns. Janet Yellen's raised debt servicing issues again, and the potential need for higher taxes, which I'm sure a lot of the Democratic pollsters are not thrilled to see that number coming out right now, that higher taxes are in the offing when Trump is talking about lowering taxes. But you also have tariffs and other things that are a tax on the system if we're not careful. And at the same time, you have debt servicing costs running pretty high. So we do have to get our financial house in order. And in that kind of environment, strong balance sheets and free cash flow are going to be one of the key drivers. But I do think there's plenty of reasons to be pessimistic. I gave you a bunch, but there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. And I think one of the fascinating juxtapositions that we found in the West Coast last week was this terrible homeless and decline of one of my favorite cities in the world that's going through a down cycle like New York is right now, like we've done in the past in big cities, against this a massive powerful force of innovation that's going on, and their ability in the Valley to look past all the problems and just see them as reasons to create new technologies to solve the problems and move things forward. But we're throwing massive amounts of money at improving the world and improving productivity. And I think that's going to pay off in a major way and give you good opportunities to invest now and in the next couple of years. So, Mark, I'm going to stop there and open it up for comments.
So, Adam Blanco, quick hand up. Then Joe.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Stephen. Excellent topic. I've got two questions, one for Stephen and one for Mark. I'll start with Mark. Mark, you had mentioned at the beginning here, before Stephen took over, that we are 5 to 10 years behind. What exactly did you mean by that? Are you talking about technology innovation or manufacturing regarding?
I was echoing, and I'm forgetting his name. This was Armbrust. We were talking about the leverage points vis-a-vis China and the US. One was the loss of Taiwan in terms of manufacturing capability, to Austin's question, and B, raw materials.
Okay.
And it wasn't 5 to 10, it was more like 10 to 15.
And that would be manufacturing at scale to replace Taiwan's production if that was lost.
Right.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that. Stephen, my question for you, excellent presentation. Really liked this one, particularly the contrast of innovation that you saw and that homelessness.
Yeah.
How does innovation help solve that problem? That's my first question to you. The second question is, how much of a threat is this homelessness in the haves and have-nots to the economy?
Great question. I don't have a great answer for it, but my best shot would be that AI has been projected by McKinsey to grow GDP by $2 to $4 trillion a year. And I think Goldman Sachs had a report out that thought it could add 7 trillion, although I don't know if that's cumulative over a couple year period or not. But if you could add 2% to GDP, and we went from growing at, just around 2% to 4%, that would give you a shot at offsetting the debt and deficit problems and actually make financing the country more manageable and get you on a path where you could be more productive throughout the system. And if AI really kicks in and you start to get the benefits of improving healthcare outcomes and lowering healthcare costs, that's 16% of GDP that could come down considerably, and that those monies could be redirected towards all our other needs. So I think there's big opportunities to solve the problem, but you gotta get the advantage of the spend. And this goes back to one of the really interesting challenges for the Biden administration, in that they did the right thing with the CHIPS Act and all those other spends, but we as a nation did it at the wrong time. We did it at 5% interest rates instead of 0 interest rates, when we could have financed it and got the benefit to do it the way you're supposed to do it. So I think, Adam, it's a great question. It comes down to, how do we execute? Do we get the return on our investment that we're putting out right now? And does AI actually deliver on the promise of increased productivity? And if it does, then you could offset some of the problems. Not all of them, but some of them.
Thank you,
I think Joe has to jump, Mark.
Yep. Joe.
Yeah, that was well summarized right there, Stephen. I mean, I really think if, as you said, right, AI delivers on productivity gains, that's what you need to beat structural inflation. But back to your earlier comment, which I think is, it's maybe as much as a comment as a question, and I apologize, is to say inflation's coming down is a misnomer because people know better. Prices aren't coming down. The rate of price increases is slowing.
Yep.
And, it was a double-edged sword that feeding a consumer-based economy, and then in the manner in which they did it, as you've said in the past, they pulled forward returns by helicoptering money, and they sowed the seeds for the very structural inflation that we're now experiencing. I'm not sure how they unring that bell. And at a time when, the question I think that Adam posed about, the haves and have-nots, there is, if you believe that book, The Fourth Turning, or some of these other things that have captured the cyclical nature of what happens in this ebb and flow of bifurcation of the haves and have-nots, right? And that rubber band getting stretched, is that it generally sorts itself out through, let's just say, more kinetic means. Rarely is it an elegant relief of that pressure between the haves and have-nots throughout history.
Yeah.
And like I said, I personally, I have no clue on how they're going to navigate this without something that's going to result in a lot of angry people. I don't know. I'm not an optimist or a pessimist. I sort of plan for the worst and hope for the best, but I'm a risk manager at heart, and I don't see how they can manage the risks that come with the conditions that are largely self-inflicted right now with our debt, the pulling forward of returns, the monetary policy that screwed things up, blah, blah, blah. So anybody offer comments? And Stephen, your thoughts as well.
I think the thing where we have to think about debt, regardless of whose it is it's the current consumption of future earnings. So you're buying from the future, you're borrowing from the future, your earnings there, whether if you're an individual, you're borrowing your future wages. If you're a country, you're borrowing your future tax receipts. And we've been doing that to a tune that the bill's coming due, and we're going to have to figure it out. And I think Ray Dalio would say that the outcome for this is often a debt jubilee if you go too far and you wipe out all the debt and start from scratch. And as you highlighted, Joe, that often comes with social unrest of a scale that you don't want to get to. So that is an issue that sooner or later politicians are going to have to wake up to it. And Yellen threw it out today that we're going to have to raise taxes. Interestingly, the idea of raising the taxes here, I think that comment would have been much better received, say, November 8th from the administration than today. So, but I credit her for being a good public servant and being honest about it. So.
Tim, you want to?
Hey, Stephen, you talked about, and I'm not sure I heard this exactly correct, but GDP growing at about 3%. How does inflation affect the reporting of that number? And is there such a thing as like GDP number and then kind of real GDP? Which,
well, that is a nominal versus real. So real is inflation adjusted. So they do an inflation adjusted number. I'm just saying that right now, if you took our 2% GDP rate that's reported, which is real nominal GDP, and we were able to put another 2% or 3% on that, which fairly conservative estimates are coming out about the impact of AI longer term on that, then you could have a shot at growing faster than your rate of debt's growing. And I think that's really the math that the government's going to have to figure out is, can we get GDP growing faster than the rate of debt so that we can get our debt servicing costs back under control? Because it's pressing up to a 6% level. That's, if you have debt at 6% of GDP, interest cost at 6%, you have Social Security and Medicare probably pushing up around another 10%. That's a lot of crowding out of spending to more productive things. And I think that's what the government has to deal with.
So I missed the answer. Was it 2 or 3% GDP growth rate? Is that the nominal number or the
That's nominal?
Nominal, okay.
Austin?
Next, Mark.
All right.
Austin?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. You made a comment that we're spending huge amounts of money to make the world a better place. I'd like to just hear your elaboration on that. How much money on what things do you think we're spending to make the world a better place?
Well, all over the world, they're spending massive amounts of money. We took, in the US, took I would say $5 trillion over the last couple of years to help people through the pandemic and other areas. So I think the intention was to make the world a better place. If you're looking for a debate on whether it actually does make the world a better place or not, I'm not the guy for that. But we spent a lot of money on a lot of things to improve productivity, to improve healthcare, to improve energy, but we don't see it because we haven't gotten all the benefits from it. But that's what I was referencing.
Thanks. And just one quick comment. I don't know if people saw, but in LA, they're testing Google self-driving cars that's available in downtown. So certainly there was some comments in the chat about whether AI will truly make the society a better place through job losses. No, that's a big question mark. No one knows. And there are certainly risks that suggest it may not.
But if it does, it's going against an environment where population is declining at a pretty rapid rate. So to keep productivity up, we would need to replace some of the loss anyway. It's not what anyone who loses their job wants to hear, but the reality is the demographic cliff is worsening pretty aggressively. So that we would have an issue sooner or later that you need the technology to do more than population can provide.
It's a crystal ball question whether the population will actually decline. Of course, we've got immigration at pretty high levels, particularly undocumented. So that's one question. Also, there are accelerating forces automating more and more jobs. Amazon's looking at putting robots for a lot of its heavy lifting in its warehouses. So there are big employers, the entire transportation industry, Uber, truck driving, these employ millions of people. Well, we'll see. Of course, people have been worried about this for centuries. The cotton gin is a case in point, but
Sure.
We'll see if it's different this time around.
Mark, I think from Ken and Ed Oates, they were not in the camp that the outcome is, from a jobs perspective, is negative. Did you get that?
Well, and I was going to say Ben times 10. I
Yeah.
think Silicon Valley is not worried about this issue. From the consensus I was hearing, they think that time and time again it creates more productivity and jobs, but it's a lot of transitions, and as you mentioned, and you're right. Transportation was one major area. Sorry, Saren.
Hi. So last week there was like a few news coming out. One was from the UK, the government basically saying to the public, if you are, please store food for a week, etc., torches, energy, water, all of that. Some of the other EU countries have also echoed in that, like guidances, nothing panicky, just like good to be prudent, like very soft spoken. In Turkey now, again, last week, like President can alone declare a state of emergency. So is this, in your opinion, like a preparation for something, or like kind of what has changed, supply chain disruptions, geopolitical tensions? But it was a bit of interesting piece of news here and there, very soft, as I said, nothing panicky, but change.
Did anyone else pick this up? I haven't heard this.
But it's all over the UK when it's on Google. I can send you, and the guidance is from the Swiss government.
Maybe throw a link in. I'm curious.
Yeah, from the UK, I can confirm it was in the press.
Yeah, I'll say.
Based on my wife's last run to Costco, she might have gotten that message because I think she bought for a couple months. We can survive.
So that's the
Dieter.
advice. That's what we should all be doing.
Hey, Dieter, you're up.
Yeah, Dieter.
Yeah, hi. Mark and Stephen talked about the ship situation, the global ship problems, and if we lose Taiwan or some trouble, how far are we behind? It's a great book, which I recommend, Ship War from Chris Miller. If you read this, there's a lot of input. Who are the big players and where are they? What's happened? And what could be done to level this out, not to lose in this 10 years.
That was one of two books recommended.
Yeah, I was gonna see if I can. There were 6 books recommended by Dan Arbus. I'm gonna try to find them. and put it on the
Ship
screen.
War is from Chris Miller. It's
Yeah,
very
that was the first one he had on the list.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that.
Well, you can see I'll put it in the chat, but if you ever go to YouTube, /361 firm, you'll see all our videos and you can see the presentation from 55 slides, very data dense, and including a recommendation for books at the end. I'll try to find it and put it on the screen.
The other one he recommended, Mark, was out of the 6 was The Power Law by Sebastian Mallaby and Chip Ward were the 2 he recommended out of the 6 that he had.
Yeah. I'm going to find this slide. Other questions, comments? While I'm searching for this book slide. Oh, I think I found it. All right. I'm going to share my screen.
I would just add, Mark, while you're pulling that up, that this session with Daniel and the morning session with Robert Norvig, did I get that right?
Peter,
Yes.
Peter Norvig and Professor Takai. Really interesting.
It was 2 of the best.
Super.
2 of the best of all the 361s, all the family office events I've been to. They were 2 of the best, most content-filled presentations you'll find. So if you get a chance, go back and look.
To your point, they put up that slide that shows the introduction of the PC did not move productivity. That
was interesting too. Yeah, that came from Peter, I think, right? Let me pull over to that one. Yeah. Sorry. That was Peter's here.
I thought the other interesting thing, Mark, while you're pulling this up, is that he and their team were working on AI back in the 80s.
AI is doing the right thing under uncertainty.
One second, let me get that.
Choosing not to watch. Uncertain.
All right, I'll find that slide.
Mark, I have a question for Stephen whenever
it's
appropriate. Stephen, at the top of your presentation, which was phenomenal presentation today.
Thank you.
From a political messaging standpoint, you're basically saying, and you tell me if I got it right, that things are better than we as Americans perceive them to be. And the Biden administration, it's sounding like the Biden administration has failed to communicate to and convince Americans that their perceptions are off about the realities of where we are economically. So are what we are experiencing, is this a failure of communication by the Biden administration? Or do we have other forces at work in terms of propaganda, misinformation that's continuing to drive this sense of darkness home as it exists? Can you talk a little bit about the dynamic as you see it?
I think
and what are the opportunities for this administration in light of the data?
I don't know if I don't know that it matters. If the good stuff I have to say is that inflation's come down a lot, and it has. But the problem is cost of living is higher by a significant amount than it was before they took office. So you eat cost of living. That's what you pay your bills on, not an inflation number that's a point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they keep saying, look at the inflation number, but people are saying you're tone deaf, because when we go to the supermarket, we're crippled. And if you're under 100,000 and more than 50% of the people making under 100,000 are net or out of money, or spending more than they've made just to get by, that's a problem. And I think that's part of it. The costs got really high really fast and they weren't ready for it, and you can't keep telling people everything's all right when they go to their bank and it's not. So I think it's not all the administration's fault. I think it is what it is, but I think when you're trying to tell people that things are better than they are, and people don't feel that way, then it's a tough message. And so I don't think they can do more than they're doing. I think the issue is when you pop $4 trillion on an economy that's growing at the end of an economic cycle of basically stimulus money on an already stimulated economy, you end up having bad things happen. So I think it's a cumulative effect of a bunch of things, some self-created, some not. And unfortunately for politicians, sometimes you're in office at the wrong time, and they might have gotten one of those.